If Washington before 1840 marked the meeting of two worldviews, the period between 1840 and 1900 was about the European-American worldview, significantly changing nearly everything in our state. Why? More than 11 million immigrants from Europe came to America during this time in hopes of a better life. Why so many? A few reasons. First, there was a lot of land, and the U.S. government wanted to grow the country by giving away land to people who would grow crops and grow communities. The British gave up control of Washington in 1846, and while a few immigrant settlers came via overland routes like the Oregon Trail, the population in Washington didn't boom until the 1880s. And that's because of the second reason for so many immigrants: huge advances in technology, especially transportation. By the 1860s, the introduction of iron holes and improved steam power meant giant ships could now cross the Atlantic Ocean in 8 or 9 days rather than 2 or 3 weeks. These ships could carry 1,500 passengers rather than 200 or 300. And while the Civil War was being waged, Abraham Lincoln set the goal of building the first railroad that would go coast to coast. The first line, the Union Pacific, went to California, but the Northern Pacific Transcontinental Line was completed across Washington in 1883. Travel time for settlers across the country went from 5 or 6 months to 5 or 6 days. The Northern Pacific and other regional railroads constructed vast transportation networks throughout the Columbia Plateau. Railroad officials not only wanted to tap eastern Washington's great agricultural potential, but they acquired enormous tracts of fertile lands that they sold to settlers who came from all corners of the nation and world. New settlers from Eastern American states, Europe, and from Asia liked the Northwest because of its rich timber resources: coal, metal ores, fisheries, and the prospect of highly productive farmland. Italian immigrants established vegetable farms on the fertile lowlands of South Puget Sound in the vicinities of Seattle and Tacoma. Immigrants from Scandinavia, Holland, and elsewhere settled in the northern Puget Sound area, where they established dairies, raised cereal grains and livestock, berries, and flower bulbs. And many Asian American immigrant farmers sold their crops at places like Pike Place Market. Many immigrants also came to Washington because it quickly created good jobs and opportunities to start your own business. With a growing rail system, the Columbia River to move barges, and Puget Sound to protect huge ocean vessels, Washington became a West Coast hub of trading and commerce. During this time between 1840 and 1900, there was a strong belief that science and research were essential to progress and in helping America become a modern and stable country. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln established the United States Department of Agriculture, and Congress passed legislation to create a national network of universities that promoted agricultural research. These actions resulted in improvements in crops and livestock, making food more abundant and affordable. To the rest of the world, America looked like a place of endless opportunity and new ideas. To those that had lived in the Pacific Northwest for thousands of years, the situation looked different. The new technology and flood of immigrants threatened their way of life, while diseases devastated families and communities. Initially, tribal leaders tried to cooperate and find ways to coexist peacefully. But treaties ratified in the 1850s were broken when vast numbers of miners and settlers spread across the region. When war broke out, tribes were overwhelmed by the firepower of the U.S. Army. Tribal lands were taken, and Native peoples were forced onto reservations with limited rights. Children were often separated from their traditional religion and culture to be taught English in boarding schools. Tribes once living in sustainable balance with nature were now pressed to quickly adopt new methods to grow food and raise livestock for subsistence. In a span of less than 60 years, the area of Washington state had completely transformed. What was an area with vibrant native communities and a small number of traders and settlers became a state with farms, factories, ports, and growing cities. Americans and recent immigrants found a state in which they could thrive. Meanwhile, native peoples fought to survive on reservations and small parcels of land. This transformation was driven by technology transporting immigrants seeking the promise of a better life.